Hello, and welcome to this instructional video on SolidWorks assemblies. In this video, we'll take a look at how we put fairly simple parts together in an equally simple assembly. Tonight, we'll be working with the bearing plate and lathe part, or axle part, that you have already made, and then the bearing that you downloaded. And so I'm going to go ahead and get started with some of my tools might be in an unusual place tonight. So I'm going to go ahead and get started with this new button, and I'm just going to select the SolidWorks default assembly. And the first thing that SolidWorks prompts us to do is to put our parts into the assembly. This pop-up window is just browsing your files. So navigate to your parts. And I'm going to go ahead and select my bearing plate first. I tend to put the part that feels like the anchor of the assembly in first, though it ultimately is pretty arbitrary. So I double-click that, and now you can see it's ready to insert, but before I click anything, I want to pin open this window. Now don't worry, if you already clicked your bearing in and that window's gone, I will show you how to get it back. But once I've pinned it, I'm going to go ahead and click on the screen to put in one of my bearing plates. Then I'm going to come back over and browse for my axle and for, my bearing. Okay. Checkmark finishes that tool. Now, like I said, if you had already clicked in the window and lost that tool, it's right here on Insert Components. It's got a different header, but it's the same exact tool. Okay, so now we have 3 parts in this assembly. And what you'll notice is there are 2 that are minus signs. They can move anywhere. And there's one that has an F. That one is not able to move. It's fixed. And so we're going to go ahead and just note that if for some reason you wanted this part to be able to move, I could right-click on the part and go to float. And that allows me to move that part around the assembly. For this one, I'm not honestly very fussed about it. So I'm going to go ahead and leave it fixed. But you're welcome to see what happens when you float it. So now I'm going to go ahead and put the bearing into the plate and then the shaft into the bearing. So I'm going to start by selecting the Mate tool on the assembly toolbar. And this allows me to use a number of relationships between the parts. So I select the outside of the bearing that will be inserted into the plate, and the inside of the hole the bearing fits into. And this part's a little bit arbitrary, but I'm actually going to flip it around because I'd like it to come out the front end here, just because, let me turn on my standard views. If I throw this in ISO, and that's a pretty view, right? So this is aesthetic. It's a little bit arbitrary, but it's aesthetic and it's practical if you're trying to see how parts look. So I'm going to go ahead and accept that default and check mark and see how it still moves. So now it moves back and forth through that hole. So I'm going to go ahead and grab the back of this flange and put it right onto the face of the plate. Because when you press fit a bearing into a plate, you're going to apply pressure on the bearing using a drill, well, no, not a drill press. We have a press in the shop. And you're going to press this bearing into this plate, and it's going to stop when it gets far enough, right? So that's physically why we tend to use flanged bearings. They're just really convenient because they have a stop. Okay, so that's 2 of it. And so now I'm going to go ahead and select the shaft that sits in the bearing. That's the smaller shoulder on the inside of the bearing. And just once again, I am going to flip that around. It's, once again, arbitrary, but, well, in this case, it's not arbitrary. I should have this on the side that has the flange. Yeah, because it's resisting, if it's pushing on it at all, it's going to want to be on this side. So I hit the check mark to accept those constraints. And I probably want to leave these a little bit spaced. In fact, in real life, I might add a spacer. So maybe I select those 2 faces, but instead of saying that I want them to be coincident, I select a slightly more involved mate here. I select a distance mate. Maybe we throw something in there to separate them. Or maybe we don't. Okay, so very simple assembly. Now, if we wanted to, we could search for some number 6 hardware to go into this assembly. So I'm going to go to McMaster. And I'm going to look for some number 6. I'm just going to use rounded head screws here. Nice Phillips. And over here on the left, oh, I selected metric. We're going to head back. I want, oh, maybe we'll grab some nylon. That's fun. We want a number 6. The thread doesn't matter to us because it's clearance, but it is going to thread into something, right? A nut or something. And so I'm going to go ahead and select, I'm going to think about how wide this plate is. I don't remember, so I come to my Evaluate toolbar. Oops, I have to turn off my Mate tool. Come to my Evaluate toolbar, hit measure. I select, nope, not that. That edge. It's 1/8 of an inch. So if I come here, 1/4 of an inch is probably enough. I could choose 3/8 of an inch to have 1/2 inch poking out the back. So I'm going to select that, go to product detail, and trying to make sure I'm still on the screen here. Somewhere there should be, interesting, this one doesn't have a download. Okay, well, my suggestion would be to poke around in here. SolidWorks does have a toolbox. I just find it a little bit less, I find it a little bit more cumbersome than finding a screw, although I'm a little bit surprised that I didn't find the downloadable. Here it is. You had to select a, it's always something. You have to select a color before you can download it. That's inside the SolidWorks file. So we're going to go ahead and save it. That should have saved to my downloads folder. So now I'm going to come back and insert a component. There it is. And so now think about how you might insert that into your clearance holes so that you can show how the hardware is going to look with this setup. Notice that I've got some sketches turned on in the parts that I downloaded. I could go through and figure out what sketches are on. I can also just change the visibility to turn off the visibility of sketches. Something that I find a really useful setting. And FYI, shortcut, and this will be the last thing I think I show you right now in your assemblies. If I select a part and I wanted more of them, if I hold down the control key and drag it, it automatically duplicates that part. Nice little shortcut that makes things like hardware a little bit easier to work with. Okay, don't forget to save. Save it somewhere that you have access to it later. Remember, you don't have access to these computers' documents for long term. Use your OneDrive, use your email, use a flash drive. So save this and come with questions.